In today's video, we're looking at the latest news around the NHL, including the latest trade rumors on several teams, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Calgary Flames, the Ottawa Senators, and the Philadelphia Flyers. Plus, are the Montreal Canadiens serious about possibly acquiring young Duck star Trevor Zegras? We'll talk about those possibilities. Plus, Jets defenseman Brendan Dillon has been suspended. We have a couple of key injury updates as well, including Bruins young centerman Matt Poitras, Pat Maroon in Minnesota, Mikhail Sergachev in Tampa. Plus, we have a big news story as well in Canada revolving around John Tavares and the Canada Revenue Agency around an $8 million tax bill. We'll discuss how that affects him as well as potential other free agents entering Canada and their teams coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a ton of news and some trade rumors to take a look at today. First up, let's start with the news out of Winnipeg that the NHL Department of Player Safety has suspended Jets defenseman Brendan Dillon for 3 games. Now, this 3-game suspension is for an illegal check to the head. They essentially said it meets all the criteria for the head being the focal point of contact, as well as the hit being avoidable. So they felt that Dillon was certainly in the wrong here and have handed him a 3-game suspension. That 3-game suspension is going to end up costing him around, I believe it's about $60,000 in actual salary that'll be forfeited here. So certainly not a good time for the Winnipeg Jets to lose one of their top 6 defensemen. Clearly the Jets are a top team in the Western Conference, certainly vying for a top playoff spot. And of course they dropped the first game after the All-Star break. Losing players like this is not going to help their case. So certainly we'd like to see Dillon avoid this hit if possible. Make sure that he doesn't end up doing this, but here we are. So Dillon's out for 3 games. Now we have some pretty significant injury updates as well. You got to feel for Tampa Bay Lightning defenseman Mikhail Sergachev. He just returned tonight. Before I recorded this video, I had down on my notes here that Mikhail Sergachev was activated off long-term injury reserve. It was making his return this evening. Unfortunately, that return has not gone well, and he's left the Tampa Bay Lightning game against the New York Rangers on a stretcher after getting tangled up with Rangers forward Alexis Lafreniere. Looks like they clicked skates, and he went down very awkwardly with his left leg kind of bent, and he couldn't get up, put weight on it, and ended up off on a stretcher. It looked bad. Definitely a left leg injury of some sort. It's difficult to say if it's ankle, knee, could there be a broken bone in there? Could it be more ligament damage? It's hard to say exactly what the injury is, just that it's a left leg and it looked bad. And like I said, he just got back after missing over a month of action with the LTIR. So certainly got a feel for him. The Wild tonight announced that forward Pat Maroon required to have a fairly minor back surgery, but that's still going to keep him out of action for about 4 to 6 weeks. Maroon is a pending unrestricted free agent and has been a player that's been mentioned in the trade rumor mill about somebody who could be moved, and it could be a nice depth piece for teams going into the playoffs. The fact that he's going to be out of action for that period of time after surgery, certainly I think it's fair to say it complicates things. I don't think it's a definite deterrent for him to be traded. I'm not going to say that it's still possible, but obviously teams are going to want to see him skating and have some health updates before they make that move. I mean, he'll have enough time. By the time we get to the deadline, it will be around that 4-week mark, so shouldn't be too far off from returning. So it complicates things, but doesn't mean it won't happen. We'll have to see where that goes. The other big news around injuries is that the Bruins have lost young centerman Matt Poitras for the remainder of the season. He had a shoulder injury that required shoulder surgery, and he's looking at a 5-month recovery. Obviously, the Bruins in their top couple spots in the center position have actually done way better this year than most predicted. I know I can say I predicted them to not be as strong as they are. Charlie Coyle, especially. Coyle is having a phenomenal season. He obviously had a more of a third-line role in the old regime with Bergeron and Krejci there, but he's really stepped up his game. Offensively speaking, he's probably going to hit a lot of career highs, and he's certainly a big part of their success. We've also seen players like Zaka and Geekie fill in nicely and we'll see what the Bruins do. But obviously not having their young centerman who made the club out of training camp and obviously got loaned to the World Junior team in Canada for that tournament. Then he went back. So clearly that is a blow for sure. But he will be done for the season, won't be recovered probably till sometime early summertime. Now, we also had a signing today in Calgary. Calgary Flames have extended forward Marty Pospisil on a 2-year extension at $1 million per year on the AAV. So, obviously a player who's kind of emerged last year as being a player that they thought might be part of the future. It's been up and down a little bit, but he gets a nice contract extension. Good news is if for any reason that contract doesn't quite work out the way they're hoping, it is completely variable in the minors to get full cap relief. So it's not really that much of an issue in that sense. Another big story they're following today, and it's going to be one that we're going to want to keep an eye on and see how it goes. But there was a news story today broken by, I believe it was CTV News and Glenn McGregor, that the Toronto Maple Leafs captain John Tavares is now going into a legal court battle with CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, which is, of course, if you're in the U.S., that's our version that would be comparable to the IRS in the United States. So essentially, it's the federal tax authority. So ultimately, John Tavares, the big debate here is actually stems from his first year as a Leaf, but he's in a 7-year contract, and he's in year number 6 right now. So obviously, this is from a long time ago, back in, I guess it would have been 2018. But we know that the way that a lot of the top stars like their contract structured is heavily in the signing bonus money, and we know that the Leafs are willing to do that. One of the few Canadian teams that do pay out huge amounts of bonus money. And in that part of his contract, his first year, Tavares collected signing bonus of well over $15 million. Now, I'm sure John Tavares, being somebody who makes multiple $1 million per season, likely has a fairly high-end accountant that would do his taxes, I would think. This is not something that JT's probably sitting there, at the end of the season or before the season's over in April, crunching the numbers and doing the paperwork himself. I just don't see that happening. So I don't think this is on Tavares, but I guess a dispute amongst the accountants. But they're holding their ground here. So essentially, Canada Revenue Agency says that part of his income should have been taxed at 38%. But Tavares is arguing that there is a tax treaty in Canada that allows athletes, musicians, actors, like people in the entertainment world and sports like him, when they earn certain parts of their income that are considered bonuses, to be taxed at 15%. So clearly, that's a huge difference. Now, the $8 million tax bill is not all from overdue taxes. A lot of that, a big chunk of it at least, is penalties and interest for, I guess, considered being late now on 6 years. Because if they reassess your taxes and to go back and determine you owe money from a bunch of years ago, they're going to also figure out how much interest you should have paid in that time frame and penalties for not doing your taxes right, et cetera, et cetera. So if you do the math on it, it's probably closer to like $6 million in actual taxes, and the other part of it would be like penalties and interest and such like that. So obviously part of that could maybe get wiped out depending on how this court case goes, but it's going to have a big impact on Canadian teams. Clearly, I'm sure John Tavares is not the only high-profile Canadian hockey player, or not even, doesn't matter if you're Canadian. Well, I guess it does, because obviously you'll file your taxes in the country of where you mainly live, which obviously a lot of Americans, even if they play in Canada, still live enough in the U.S. that they would file their taxes in the United States. But in this case, for Canadian hockey teams in the NHL, such as the Leafs and others, getting these high-profile UFAs to sign here could make a big difference. I'm sure that John Tavares, like I said, he's not the only player in the Canadian market getting paid big signing bonuses. So what's happening to the other players when they're doing their taxes? Is there going to be any other players that are going to be readjusted here or reassessed, or how is this all going to play out? But if Tavares loses his case here and has to pay that back to Canada Revenue, that's going to have a major impact on players' decisions. And like I said, it could have a major impact. There's already, a bit of a disadvantage for Canadian teams in the UFA market, which is, in some ways, you think about it, really shouldn't be. Because if you look at the difference, they're all paid in US dollars, but if they're living in Canada and converting their money to Canadian dollars with the Canadian dollar, the value of the way it is, converting US money to Canadian money, you do get more. So in theory, I think there is also an advantage in that sense. So it's not, but the taxes tend to be higher than, not all, but a decent amount of U.S. jurisdiction. So we'll have to follow this story and see where it goes, because clearly it's going to have an impact one way or another. If Tavares wins his case, it'll be a good thing, and if he loses, it's going to be hurtful not only to his pocketbook but for Canadian NHL teams in general. Other news today, we're getting into the trade rumor section of the video, but let's start with Vladimir Tarasenko. He's changed agents yet again. I believe this is the third agent for Tarasenko in 4 years. We saw him change agents this past offseason after the early part of the offseason did not produce a free agent contract for him. There was speculation that he had a multi-year deal from the Hurricanes, and there was a multi-year deal from the Senators. Neither ended up getting signed. He ended up doing a one-year deal with Ottawa after the fact, after he had changed agents, and now he's changed agents yet again. So Tarasenko will now be repped by Craig Oster. Craig Oster, in case you don't know, is the uncle of Brady Tkachuk. It'd be Brady's mom's brother. Craig Oster is a fairly prominent NHL agent and does rep a lot of top players, including several Ottawa Senators. So it's got people talking. What does this mean? He represents his nephew Brady, represents Josh Norris, he represents Tyler Kleven, Eric Brandstrom, Yuri Schmeichel, and there's a couple others as well in there from Ottawa that he represents. So is this a case of maybe Tarasenko, considering that he wants to stay in Ottawa and figures he's seen Oster get a lot of good deals done with the Sens for his players? I don't know. I mean, it could be, but a lot of reporters seem to think it's more likely a case that he is pretty likely to get traded by the deadline, that maybe there's not a long-term future for him in Ottawa, but that he's hoping for a contract extension to be a part of the trade so that he doesn't have to go through being a UFA this coming summer. So wherever he goes, he's hoping to, which is good for Ottawa, because if he's playing well, his numbers are good, so he's probably going to generate a decent value to begin with, and then if you throw in an extension as well, that's going to boost his value too. So if Ottawa can get like a first-round pick or something, fairly high value, as much as they like the player, they might be better off to take the deal. But I do think that there's a possibility he stays, and I think maybe this is his way, because like I said, there's some that think this is going one way or the other, and I kind of am in the middle. I wonder if this is kind of him hedging his bets here and saying, you know what, I'm impressed with this guy's work. I want him to represent me, and I know that if it works out that I end up staying in Ottawa, then I know he'll get me a good deal. And obviously, there's a lot of connections there. But at the same time, if a trade works out for the best and I can get a contract extension with it, I'm confident there too. So we'll see. But Tarasenko changing agents has got a lot of people talking about his future again. And Bruce Garriock of the Ottawa Sun does some collaborations with TSN as well. Also had an article today talking about this news as well as some other stuff. And he also went on to mention that the Sens clearly want to make some additions of some good pros, as they've been putting it in the media. They are certainly still interested in Chris Tanev. There's no doubt about that. Tanev may or may not become a Senator before the deadline. If he does not, and they'll be certainly looking hard at him in the summer for, as a free agent, for sure. And there's also reported interest in Ottawa around Brett Pesce. Now, they're not the only team. Brett Pesce is, of course, with the Carolina Hurricanes. There's still some think that he could be dealt. I mean, considering Carolina's status right now, where they're at in the standings, I mean, you wouldn't think they'd want to subtract ahead of the playoffs, but contract negotiations haven't really produced much between them and their, one of the top right-hand D here, who I think there is interest to keep for sure, but I think they're concerned about losing him as a UFA. Many feel he's going to be able to command a contract in the $7 million range. And like I said, Ottawa definitely has interest there, but they're by far not the only ones. There's lots of teams keeping an eye on Pesce. I'm not 100% convinced he gets moved, but because he's unsigned, teams are watching him closely and generating interest. But other Senators that Garriock lists as very likely to be dealt, or at least to have lots of conversations around, include Eric Brandstrom, Dominic Kubalik, no surprise there, and possibly even Mark Kastelik. I don't think they've been super happy with Kastelik's performance this year. We'll see how he plays the next few weeks. About a year ago, many thought he'd be the long-term solution as the number 4 center, and that's still a possibility, but I think there's also, depending on the return and what's out there, especially with a thin center market, and he's good on faceoffs, I can see maybe the market will produce good value for him, and they won't be able to pass it up. So we'll see, but he's another one to watch as well. Philadelphia Flyers, speaking of centermen, are getting a lot of interest in Scott Laughton. It's, again, somebody they're not out there absolutely looking to move. The belief is that if teams want to really have a good shot at getting him, they're going to have to offer up something good, like a first-round pick. But Laughton is somebody that can play in your middle six, can play center, play in a variety of situations, and is generating a lot of buzz. So, just like Elliot Friedman made mention of Boone Jenner on his podcast here this week. Again, not saying he's available, just saying that there's lots of teams that are starting to show interest in some of these other, bottom 6, number 3, guys that would be good 3Cs on a lot of top teams and can play a different style, good face-offs, good with grit, a little bit offensive. And Laughton and Jenner fit the bill. Like, they can play up and down your lineup. They've at times played in their top 6 on their own teams. It just depends on who's healthy and who's not and where things stand. But on a real strong contending team, they'd probably be a little lower in their lineup, but they can handle that kind of checking role as well. He didn't say Jenner was available, but he said that he's been told around the league that if the Jackets wanted to open things up and consider moving him, that he thinks they'd get a pretty sweet haul in return, considering what other teams really think of him and highly value this player as a good playoff addition to their clubs. There was reports earlier tonight as well from Nick Alberga saying that there is belief that the Leafs are still working on a deal with the Calgary Flames. Doesn't mean for sure it's going to come to fruition. It doesn't sound like it was necessarily imminent or super close, but he said the latest intel he had suggested they were talking to the Flames about a D-man and a forward, so some kind of a combo coming back to the Leafs. Now, not clear exactly what that would be. I would think it'd be more likely Tanev than Hanifin, but you never know. Hanifin's another guy that is reportedly needs to make a decision for the Flames here very soon to let them know, like, do you want to sign or not? The Flames would love to sign Hanifin and keep him. He's probably the only one of those pending UFAs that they really for sure want to keep. But if he doesn't want to sign, then of course they're going to take the plunge and move him and hopefully get a good return. Clearly, other teams like the Bruins have been interested in Hanifin too and bringing him back to his hometown, but hard to say if that's going to work out or not. But the Leafs and Flames have been rumored to be having discussions for quite a long time. We know Brad Treliving knows that team very well, is the architect behind most of those players. And certainly if he's looking for help on the blue line, which would not be surprising at all, I think he would love to get Tanev in Toronto. So we'll see where that goes. Could they reignite discussions? Could there be a combo package involving a forward as well out of Calgary? Let me know, I guess, if you're looking at this potential deal. Now, who might the forward be that the Leafs would be targeting here in the deal? And give me some mock trades, and you think the Flames and Leafs could actually pull off that makes sense for both clubs, involving likely Tanev plus a forward plus a return from Toronto. And lastly, there's more and more reports. It seems like it keeps popping up here, but it sounds more and more from what we hear, and with confirmation from a guy like Frank Seravalli, who's pretty reliable and pretty plugged in, that Ducks' young forward Trevor Zegras is definitely available after some contentious contract negotiations over the summer and everything. It does sound like they would be willing to move him, and there's continuously more and more links popping up, linking him to Montreal and reuniting with his former teammate from the U.S. national program, Cole Caulfield. They're also great friends off the ice as well. So I'm sure that would go over big in Montreal, and Caulfield would be thrilled to have his old buddy join the Habs. I mean, clearly there's been just a lot of buzz around Zegras' future. I mean, we know that given the fact they're going to get another high pick, plus they traded for Cutter Gauthier, plus they have Mason McTavish, plus they have Leo Carlson. If Zegras does stay with the Ducks, he's probably going to have to be a winger instead of a centerman. And after a long drawn out contentious negotiation this summer, we know Pat Verbeek is, I guess there's some that think that he's not like in love with how Zegras plays, and that maybe he might be willing to move him for, a combination of things that he might think improve the team overall. When you have a large group of budding young talent like that, especially when you have several centermen, it's not unusual to see one or two pieces go. His best buddy, Jamie Drysdale, was just moved recently to the Flyers. I kind of wonder if Zegras might be open to the concept of moving on. Not that he's really going to have much say in the matter if he does, but certainly the Habs have a ton of young players and draft capital that they could use as trade piece to the Ducks to entice them to do this. They have lots of interesting young defense. There's some young forwards that might be interesting as well for Anaheim. I really think Ken Hughes could put together a real interesting package for Verbeek and the Ducks to really consider here, but it seems like it keeps popping up. I know Shayna Goldman of The Athletic talked about Zegras' future and again linked him to Montreal as well, and of course she's not affiliated with any NHL club or anything. She wouldn't have a vested interest in that, so clearly that's just based on a combination of her opinion and the things she's heard from being a connected reporter. So be interesting to see. I don't know if this is necessarily something that happens before the deadline, but I'll be curious to see if we get to the summer, if a Zegras trade does materialize and Ken Hughes and the Habs end up possibly being the front runner. So let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.